That was just a bit of symbolism for what's about to come in this video. You're not going to like it, I don't think, but you need to hear it. We have to talk about the Greg Miller interview with Shu Yoshida. Now, if you don't know who Shu Yoshida is, he's the man who nearly single-handedly wiped out Xbox as a company with this one video a few years ago.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
He's a much-loved and well-respected figure higher up within PlayStation, or at least he was, and he was president of Worldwide until he got replaced by Herman Hulst. But anyway, the point is he was there for a long time, 30 years I think. But more relevantly to us PSVR2 fans is that he was a big driving force behind the original PSVR back in its early stages of its life. Anyway, he's only officially left PlayStation like a few days ago, and Greg Miller immediately got this interview with them. So it's like a 2-hour long interview. They talk about like all his time at Sony and PlayStation, and eventually they hit on PSVR2, albeit very briefly. So here's what was said.
Time whenever we talk about VR, you coming on the GDC show and talking about, look, this is we are PlayStation 1 again. We are starting from scratch. Back to the work.
I'm sorry I was wrong. You know, PSVR2 didn't become PS2, so yeah, you can.
What happened with PSVR2? What happened with PSVR2, Shu?
Well, let's move on. The conversations.
Now you might think the part at the end there is very bad, the part with the long pause, and then he says, let's move on. He says, let's move on, and then they both laugh. But that's not the worst part for me. So the topic starts by Shuhei reminiscing about how he introduced PSVR to the world during GDC 2015 or 14, one of those, I can't remember what it was, with Greg Miller saying that he remembered that, and he remembered Shuhei saying PSVR 1 was like going back to PS1 again. That's something that Shuhei had said at the time. It was like, you know, kind of starting again kind of a thing. This is new technology, we're starting again. Shuhei then interrupts Miller saying, I'm sorry I was wrong. PSVR 2 didn't become PS2. Now he says something else after this, but Miller butts in, so it's kind of hard to tell for sure, but I've listened to it a few times, and I think what he says is,
yeah, you can.
What happened with PSVR2?
So almost like he's taking the blame for a failure. Now, nobody expected PSVR2 to sell 150 million units like the actual PS2 did. That would be ridiculous. But I think most people, reasonable people, would have expected it to grow its share of the market over its predecessor PSVR 1 at least, and maybe to a significant degree. But these words coming out of Yoshida's mouth sounds like an admission of defeat. He says PSVR 2 didn't become PS2, like he's already talking about it like past tense. It's a thing in the past. It's like the Visa, it's done. Now keep in mind, this is a fella who up until a few days ago was high up the food chain at PlayStation, so that's a little temperature check right there of how these Sony higher ups feel about PSVR 2. So Miller then obviously he sees the opportunity to talk about PSVR 2, so he says, what happened? What happened to PSVR 2, Shu? Then you're hit with that long pause from Shuhei, followed by let's move on, and laughter from both of them. Now I've already seen people giving many different explanations as to why Yoshida wouldn't say anything about the PSVR 2. He wouldn't be allowed to talk about current projects, for example, or maybe he's under an NDA, stuff like that. However, I think he did say a lot about PSVR 2. The long pause, the comical, let's move on, and then both of them laughing. That says a lot, you know, it's like a picture, a picture paints 1,000, no, sorry, let me start that again. Picture says 1,000 words, something like that. Why can't I remember the wording of that? I don't know why I can't. But the point is, it's the body language, it's the intonation of the voice, it's the comical aspect of it. It is, you know, let's not talk about PSVR 2. That's basically what it is now. You can read into it any other way if you want. That's how I'm reading into it. And I think it's kind of blatant. So we can agree to disagree if you want to. But, you know, I don't think there's much doubt about it. So after this interview, I believe now more than ever that Sony have very little faith in PSVR 2. They're just going through the motions now. So it's, you know, relying on third parties, Quest ports, indies, which, you know, I've already believed that's what we were doing anyway. I mean, it's not why I bought a €600 headset. to never get to use the full potential of that, because 90% of the time I'm playing a Quest port and it's like, oh, I get to run this mobile VR game at 90 native instead of 60 reprojected. Cool. But most worrying about that is, to me, it seems like the PSVR3, the possibility of that ever existing, becoming slimmer and slimmer. Now, I predict I'm going to get some of the usual responses to this kind of usual negativity that comes out of me. Well, you call it negativity, I would call it realism and reading facts and information. So I'm going to put together this beautiful slide, and it might be behind me, and I'm going to move out of the way, and then you can read that if one of your points is there, and my answer will be in that slide. So to end this video, I think this is a wake-up call to anyone who thinks that Sony themselves still has faith in PSVR2. But if you're someone who already feels like Quest ports, third parties, indies are already, enough, then it's just another day. It's just business as usual. This interview changes nothing for you. And if that is you, that's fine. If you're happy with how things are, I'm not trying to tell you that you should not be happy with how things are. We definitely still have some cool 2024 games that got pushed into 2025. Yeah, 2025, that sounded weird when I said it. But yeah, that should keep us going for another few months. After that, who knows? Wait and see. That is it for this video, but before I go, let me thank my members whose names are on screen as I speak. They are the following: Mr. 777, Jedi Dan, Geza, Aced, Edify Till I Die, Crumb, Pete Hawkins, Deej the Pumpkin Patch Kid, Plank71 Esports Commentator for Hire, No One Knows, and Muzz. Thank you very much for that support. It is greatly appreciated, and it is more support than Sony have ever given the PSVR2, except for day one. Well, year one, we'll say. That's it. I'm not going to shit in them now for the rest of the video, because it's over. Goodbye.
Let's move on.